Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou, I tēnei whakāturanga, I tēnei kōrero mō Ngā Ture o Te Ataarangi. Welcome to this explanation of the 5 rules of Ataarangi. These 5 rules were first developed in the late 1970s, I think 78 or 79, with the work of Ngoipe Whairangi and Katarina Mataira. They're proven over and over again to be the key elements or the key guidelines for maintaining a group and supporting each other, but it's also proven to be really important for maintaining an immersion environment for a group. So I'm going to go through the 5 rules, explain the context in terms of learning, but also talk about some of the things, how it helps you, and how it supports others within your group. Ka pai. Nō reira, ko te mea tuatahi. There's 5 rules. First rule, kaua kōrero Pākehā. That should be fairly obvious given that Ataarangi is an immersion approach. We do this in a special way. We start with a karakia, sometimes with a waiata or sometimes with a mihi, but normally in our classes we start our immersion space with a karakia and we end it with a karakia. This is an important signal to our subconscious in terms of how we're thinking, to be able to flip from thinking in English to then begin to thinking in Māori. And it's important to get to that point where we can switch the way we think from one language to another. And so it sets a context for us to be able to continue to not only speak Māori, but obviously learn Māori. We're able to practice, and through practice, we're able to acquire more proficiency, more confidence, and also correct our mistakes as we go. So, kaua kōrero Pākehā, maintain that immersion environment. It's super important. The key reason is the moment someone speaks some English, it actually switches your brain over to thinking in English again. So normally for new learners, it's about half an hour before you really start to begin to think in Māori. And after a while, after a few weeks of doing classes, probably up around the middle, then that shortens down significantly. By the end of the program, probably about 5 to 10 minutes, depending on your background with reo or the amount of practice you get. But if you can get to under a minute, well, then that's getting exceptionally good with your ability to code switch. The technical name is to code switch from English and into Māori. Kaua kōrero Pākehā, don't speak any English. It gets in the way of us to be able to learn a language naturally. The second rule is kaua puka tikanga. Now, most people will have come across the word tikanga. Puka means to defile or denigrate or to go against, trample on those tikanga. And so obviously puka tikanga in a traditional sense was doing things such as when someone's doing a whai kōrero, to just walk straight in front of them. That's definitely not something you do. Or doing things like sitting on someone's pillow or even sitting on their bed quite often. That's their personal space. So once they've set out their mattress, their bed in the wharenui, technically you should ask their permission whether you're going to sit on their bed or around that, or if you're very close to them, kei te pai tērā. But if it's someone else, you should really ask permission. That's all around not just courtesy, but the way in which we maintain norms and protect our mana, to protect our tapu in the cultural environment of a marae or some other gathering of te ao Māori. But in the context of a lesson, it's a slightly different focus. Obviously, we want to learn tikanga as well, but particularly online, we're not going to be sitting on any tables or occupying anyone's personal space or walking in front of a whai kōrero. The main thing that we're talking about here, particularly in the online space with Zoom, is that we want you to follow the lesson that has been demonstrated by the kaiako. This is really important. The second rule is something that takes a little while to get used to. Now, it's particularly important where you may have heard another word for something. Let's say, the word that is taught is pango, and yet the word that is that you've heard in your area is mangu. And those are two different words. In some iwi, they have slightly different meanings, and in other iwi, they are the same. Other iwi don't use the word pango, and other areas don't use the word mangu, or they use it. So it's quite nuanced, depending on where you're from and depending on the context in which you're using it. So rather than get into all of that detail, it may well be that the kaiako decides to teach pango and just pango, and everyone in the class has heard that word pango, pango, pango over and over again. If you know the word mangu and you add that to the mix, immediately your fellow students are going to want to know what's all that about, or it's just another word that they've got to try and remember, or is it a different meaning? All of these things are going around in their minds because no one's explaining it. They have to work it out for themselves. So it's really unhelpful if you introduce the word mangu while the word pango is being taught. Now, there is an exception to that, and that is that in some breakout rooms, you are located in a particular rohe or an iwi region, which is really what we want to get to. That's the level we want to achieve, is that we have taiwhirinaki or breakout rooms, taiwhirinaki and their breakout room based in a particular tribal area. And they're able to research or find out what are the words, do they use pango or do they use mangu? Is it different or is it the same? And are able to use the word. So even though the word in the kopa matua that has been demonstrated by the tai tuara is pango, when you get into the breakout room, you're using a localized words that is normalized in the area where you're from. That's the best case scenario, where you learn the reo, where your whakapapa connects you to, or the area where you live. So what's the long and the short of that is that if you're adding new words or wanting to have conversations about things, and all the other students in the group are really getting confused because they're hearing all these other words, all these other sentences, or a different way quite often a sentence has 3 or 4 different ways that it can be said. We're only teaching one way, so that until everyone's got that one way, and then we start to provide the other alternatives. But to begin with, it can be really confusing if there's lots of different variations. So kaue puka tikanga, follow the tikanga that has been presented to you in the classroom, and it's super helpful for the others in your group. Te ture tua toru, kaue aki tētahi ki tētahi. Aki is one of those words that can be a positive word or it can be a negative word. So in a positive sense, it means to encourage people, provide support. So it says, kia ka, kia maia, calling out to your children playing game netball or something like that, and you say, kia ka, that's aki, kei te aki, kia pai te mahi, to encourage them to play well or do something particular, specific. Now that's a positive aki. There's a negative aki, which quite often is kia kaha, which is flipped it over into something that is more demeaning or derisive of a person, or even if you don't even think you're doing it. So quite often the aki can be really minor, and body language is super important, particularly when we're learning a language where we're observing all sorts of things, tone of voice, body movement, or even a simple so that sigh sends out an immediate signal to everyone in the group that you're hoha, that it's not going fast enough, or this person has made this mistake 2 times, and why can't they learn it right now, and why can't they be as good as what we need everyone, because we all need to move it. All of those sorts of attitudes start to creep in, and the moment someone starts feeling that vibe from a person in the group, it actually slows them down. It doesn't help them. So doing things like tapping the table, you can't see that here, but tapping the table, or, because you can sort of see that, or you can hear it through the mic, or just body language going like this, looking up at the ceiling, that all sends signals that slow everyone down and disrupt the trust and the connection and the relationships we're seeking to build as a group within your kopaiti. So, kaue aki tētahi ki tētahi. People ask, well, what can I do? the best thing you can do is silently listening to what they're doing. Now, we're a bit different because in a Zoom, you can mute your mic and you can talk. So just providing support is actually saying it, not to sort of try to send signals to them, because sometimes they're not picking up on your signals and it's further confusing them. So simply say the sentence while your mic is muted, and then they have all the time and the support from you and others to really think about the word and come out with the right answer when they're ready. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 times before it comes out right. So kei te paitera, that's a natural part of learning. Kaue aki aki tētahi ki tētahi. Don't push people faster than they can go. Don't send those sorts of body language signals that you think are helpful, maybe, or you're just simply frustrated because it slows everyone down. The fourth rule, and this is, well, they're all important, but kia ahua tu he pātai ki a koe ka tahi anō koe ka āhei ki te whakahoki. That's a long sentence saying basically when a question is asked of you, then only then is it appropriate for you to respond. What that's really saying is don't butt in on other people's turns. So everyone needs to talk. Everyone needs to hear their voice. It's not good enough to just say it in your head. And I'll say that over and over again. Quite often we think because we've said it in our mind, or, we've thought about it in our mind, that's good enough. That's not helpful for the ability to kōrero. It's helpful for your understanding maybe of the structure of language, but it's not going to help you with your ability to have a conversation. You need to hear your voice. You need to measure what you're hearing from others or hearing from the tai whirinaki or the tai tuara, and is it the same as what is coming out of my mouth? Which quite often it's 2 different things. Your brain can be saying one thing, but what comes out of your mouth is something different. So that's all a natural part of learning. So everyone has to speak. There's no hiding. If it really becomes overwhelming, and it can sometimes become like that, particularly, you might have had a really stressful day. Maybe there's a lot going on in your life. There's tamariki running around, the mokopunas has just arrived, or you've got to think about the meal you've got to cook later on tonight. All of these things are going through your mind, and it might become overwhelming when you get into the class and trying to focus in on that, which you have to do. Really, you have to try and focus on that, and sometimes it just takes a little bit of time. So if you need a little bit of time and just basically the best way you can send signals to the tai whirinaki that you're still thinking is just go like that, and they'll come in when they think maybe that you need support. But the best thing, if you are overwhelmed and it is really just over the top of your head and you're feeling that you're just no way that you can even say anything, which can happen, and there's no doubt about that. Maybe just turn your camera off, even though we will have told you leave your camera on. But it's sometimes just having that little bit of space, even if it's only for like 15 seconds, half a minute, that can sometimes be enough to just collect yourself and be ready. It's always a lot of pressure when the turn comes around to you. It's easy when it's someone else's turn. You have the answer straight away. But the moment it comes to you, all of these emotions and ideas and thinking starts flooding your mind, and you can't think straight. So you have to go through that, and you'll get better and better at it. By the end of the 20 weeks, it'll be relatively straightforward. When it comes your turn, you'll feel confident that the other people in your group have got your back and will know how best to support you. So don't butt in. Or the other point to make about that is sometimes you think that you're helping someone who's struggling, but sometimes it's actually compounding the problem. So some of the things, some of the worst things you can do, and this is really important to understand, is don't give people answers, or don't sort of just give them little clues and that become a helicopter where you fly the answer in. Everyone has to work it out in their minds for themselves. The moment they get that light bulb moment, then it really sticks in your mind, in your long-term memory. If people are giving you the answers, you're there trying to remember what someone said, as opposed to really work out what is the correct sentence. So And you'll find also that if you start feeding someone an answer, after a while, they'll be waiting for you to give them the answer, and they won't actually go through in their own space and think through the answer for themselves. So give people the time to think it through. Around about 7 seconds. Something new that you have to comprehend, about seven, and that's a long time. You think of 7 seconds while everyone's waiting for you. 7 seconds to hear a question, process it, and then think about what sorts of things you might say in response. So give people time. Don't butt in. Don't give them the answers. Allow them to work out the answers for themselves. The last point, kia ngākau maha ki tētahi ki tētahi. This is a key element of Ātarangi, and we talk about this a lot, is that we need to support each other and have empathy for others in the group. It's really important that when we're learning a language, we're using parts of our brain that are different to the parts of our brain that we learnt our first language, and it's different parts of our brain to what we learnt when we were at school. So particularly at school, we're using a lot of logical frontal cortex sort of brain thinking. We're using a lot of visual learning in terms of reading and writing. So that's very strongly visual, logical part of your brain that you're utilizing. It's all that cognition, that ability to think things through is really good when you're solving a problem, but it's really short-term memory. You can learn something with that part of your brain, but in 2 weeks' time, 3 weeks' time, you start to lose that proficiency. What you have to do is to provide the space for your long-term memory to take control. And your long-term memory is in the area where you learn by listening, so for languages in particular. So the part of your brain, the temporal lobe of your brain, is where you process listening. It's also the part of your brain that has a long-term memory. So it accesses long-term memory and manages long-term memory, which is perfect for what we're doing. And then the other part of the temporal lobe is that's the area where we process emotions. So quite often when we're learning in this way, our emotions can be quite heightened, and we wonder, why am I feeling like this? I'm feeling either really whakamā when I'm not usually like that, or I'm really angry when I'm usually a very mahaki, a very calm and sort of person. I don't know. All these things start to well up, in particular when you're learning in a really good way. So that's a good sign when the emotions are heightened within this learning approach. It's actually a good indication that your subconscious is really taking on a lot of things, and maybe it's getting such a workout, like trying to run a marathon, and the most you've ever run is 1 kilometer. It feels really sore at the end of that run. It's a little bit like that with your emotions. When you give your emotions a real workout, they become heightened. But gradually, more and more, the more you're in immersion, the more you're doing this and supporting each other, it will become easier and easier. And you just need to be able to provide support for the others in your group when they do go through that. So, kia ngākau maha ki tētahi ki tētahi. That last rule is have empathy. Ngākau maha ki is ngākau, your heart, your emotional heart, should be calm and peaceful and supportive. Kia ngākau maha ki tētahi, one to each other, between each other. Nō reira, koe Ngā Ture e rima, kaue kōrero Pākehā, don't speak any English. Kaue puka tikanga, follow what you've been presented with, stick with what you've been presented with for the sake of the other people in the group in particular. Kaue akia ki tētahi, don't push people faster than they can go, give people the time to work it out for themselves. And that leads in also to that whole thing, don't butt in. Don't give people answers, but also everyone has to speak. Don't sort of get all shy when it comes your turn and say, oh, I'll pass it to someone else when it's your turn. You really have to speak to be able to gain that proficiency. And then the last rule, kia ngākau maha ki tētahi, have empathy for others in your group and knowing that emotions will be heightened. It's a natural part of learning a language. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou.